Hi, I'm Penelope Aiken, and this is the Authentic Ewe Podcast. This is a podcast about one big, beautiful idea, creating workplaces where people truly love to come to work and where they feel safe to be their authentic selves. Today I'm joined by David Hamilton. How exciting! I just wanted to start off with my usual question, which is, would you mind telling us a little bit about what you do, but more importantly, why you do it?
I write books that kind of blend science and self-help and sometimes touch into even spiritual ideas and concepts. Why I do it? I could give you two answers. The original answer was my mum had postnatal or postpartum depression, and I wanted to help my mum. Obviously, my mum wasn't really telling the kids that she's struggling, but you sort of know. And when I just started high school, I was 11 years old. The English teacher took us to the school library. I don't think I'd ever been in a library before. And this might sound a bit kind of, woo-woo, but a book just fell off the shelf. Now, I was 11 years old. Maybe I bumped it or something. I don't remember. But the book was called The Magic Power of Your Mind by a gentleman called Walter Germain. And I just thought, I bet that could help my mum. And I put it in my bag. I borrowed it. If I say I borrowed it, I didn't know that you're supposed to join a library and sign a book out. So we still have the book. But, it didn't cure my mum of depression in a day. But you know what it did do? Is it gave her sort of insights and techniques and practices that were helpful for her in navigating a course through some of the tricky times. So when things got tough, she learned about affirmations and she learned about meditation and stuff. So that became such a help for my mum. Because back in the mid-70s, postnatal depression wasn't very well understood, not the way we understand it now. And so my mum didn't get the right help. So this was the first time my mum actually felt, these are things I can do for myself. So it was such a big thing that all through my teenage years, my mum and I used to have these on and off conversations about the magic power of the mind. So that became a passion, a real interest for me. So wind the clock forward, and I'd finished my PhD, and I was now working in drug development, and really in the fields of cardiovascular medicine and cancer in a big pharmaceutical company. My colleagues would celebrate the fact that a drug that we had been involved in developing had been successful in clinical trials. And it's all amazing. But for me, I was, happy in that respect, but more fascinated in understanding why did so many people improve on a placebo that was made of sugar. And the reason why I was interested in that is because my mum and I had had all those conversations about the power of the mind. So I started in my own time researching the biological basis behind the placebo effect. And that uncovered all the different ways that mindset and belief and emotion and visualization and mental practices can have physiological effects, not just in the brain, but all throughout the body. So that's really why I do what I do.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible. I'm really grateful for you. I'll tell you why. If you're somebody like me, a director of organizational development, I'll go into an organization and I'll say to the CEO, "Hi, CEO. No, thanks for the strategy and thanks for these words that apparently we stand for, as in the values. I've got a really strong feeling that kindness might help us achieve our results in some kind of way." And you can imagine how that will go down. I love how you start your book off talking about the origins of mindfulness and how that language had to change for it to take off in the Western world. Because, of course, joss sticks and manifestations and whatever, don't resonate with everybody. If you were somebody like me, how would you explain the impact that kindness can have on an organization?
It's really about learning to start from empathy. We sometimes think of, if you've got kindness in an organization, it sounds woo and it's fluffy and weak, because we have this idea, I suppose, that being a leader is all about being strong and tough and, making really important high-level strategy decisions and being firm with things. And of course, these things are absolutely valuable. But what is also valuable is kindness, in the sense where it starts from empathy, because I suppose kindness in a leadership role, it just means having a respect for people's opinions, people's needs, and a genuine desire to understand people and to be supportive of people. It doesn't mean you can't be a good decision maker. It doesn't mean you can't be firm, but you can be firm and be kind at the same time by just being respectful. But if you start from a space of empathy and compassion and a genuine concern for people's feelings and their needs and their opinions, I think how you then act or react in any given situation will always be coming from the right space. So when you start behaving in that way, people feel valued and people feel heard and they feel seen and they feel respected. And what begins to happen, and we can see this in research, is people want to stay in the company rather than leave. And it costs a lot of money for companies to replace people that have left. So one of the best ways to retain people is to make them feel listened to, make them feel seen, make them feel heard, make them feel respected and valued. And these are all things that we do by leading with empathy, by leading with compassion, with practicing kindness. As I say, not in the soft, fluffy, not avoiding tough decisions, not just sweeping things under the carpet, but acting in compassionate, supportive ways.
Mm. And can you talk us through a little bit of the science behind that and what it does to your body and how that helps from a health perspective?
Yeah, well, again, this is something that's useful for organizations to know as well, because one of the major costs is absenteeism due to stress. Now, physiologically, the exact opposite of stress is kindness. And we usually think of the opposite of stress as peace or calm. But states like peace or calm are the absence of stress. And that's not the same as the opposite of stress. The opposite physiologically, in terms of what goes in the opposite direction, what generates the opposite effects, is actually kindness. And I know that kindness is a thing that you do, stress is a state, so it doesn't sound like it's the opposite. But if you reword that, think of the opposite of an experience of stress, and what that experience is like is an experience of kindness. What I'm talking about here is the internal experience. If you help someone or someone helps you, or you pay someone a compliment genuinely or support someone, what's that like for you? And you'll find that the physiological effects in your brain, your body, are exactly opposite to that of stress. I mean, for example, stress dials up a region at the back of the brain that plays a central role in stress, worry, fear, anxiety. And it gives you the kind of cloudy thinking and all that kind of stuff. And that's why it's difficult when you feel stressed to just think positive, because it's a physical effect in the brain. But when you have an experience of kindness, whether you're the giver or even the receiver of it, or even just witness it, it dials down that region of the brain exactly in the opposite direction. The same region, stress dials up, kindness dials it down. The point being, it's a physical effect in the brain. You're bypassing the need to think positive or come up with different strategies. It is a genetically wired physiological effect that is exactly opposite. One of the things I love about it is that these effects cascade throughout the body, because stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, are produced through experiences of stress. So when you have experiences of kindness, you also produce biology, and I just so happen to like calling them kindness hormones because they're exactly opposite. Now, what your kindness hormones do, these are just the physiological molecules that get produced when you have an experience of kindness. They actually park on the lining of your blood vessels, and that releases a tension. It causes a little reaction. It generates a wee substance called nitric oxide, which in and of itself is a heart drug. It's actually prescribed in various forms for angina and other kind of things. And what it does is it softens the walls of your blood vessels, and they go like that, they expand. And literally physically wider. And that means that your heart doesn't have to push as hard to get the blood through. So your heart eases off its pressure, what that means for you and me is a reduction in blood pressure. So kindness is cardioprotective, and that means it protects your cardiovascular system. It is a physiological effect. It's a genetically wired response to experiences of kindness, which is exactly opposite from what happens when you feel stressed. It increases the blood pressure. So kindness decreases it, not because it just feels nice, but because it's a physiological effect of an experience of kindness.
Yeah, that's crazy. I was laughing at one of the examples that you had in your book when you were parking and a man took up 2 car parking spaces and you were angry and sort of rolling your eyes. And then you realized he was an elderly man. And all of a sudden you were like, oh no, just been horrible to this man. And it just reminded me of a similar experience that I had recently. Well, not recently, it was a couple of years ago maybe. I was on a flight to Singapore. I was going through a divorce and I was just like in a really bad place in my life and I was just really stressed and not good. My seat was next to this girl. She was sort of a little bit larger and she was there just sorting her things out and I was like huffing and puffing and sort of eye rolling and squashed into the seat next to the window. My charger wasn't working and she said, oh, you can use my charger if you like. And I was like, oh, okay, well, thank you. And I sort of used her charger, but still annoyed. And then I start sort of trying to watch this film, and she's trying to get my attention. I'm just like, what now? And she said, I just wanted to say, I think you're really beautiful. And I was just like, oh no. I was like, I feel really awful, really, just by that compliment and that kindness. And I got chatting to her, and it turns out she was a 15-year-old unaccompanied minor. My daughter's 14 years old. And she was absolutely terrified going now from her father's to her mum's and really scared of flying. And all of a sudden, I just had like this immense wave of empathy for this poor, terrified girl who I'd been horrible to. And then she started throwing up on me as we were coming into land, like literally on me. And so I undid my seatbelt and I was stood on the chair, like trying to get away from it. And the cabin crew were like, sit down, sit down.
Wow.
And I ended up walking her through and staying with her and looking after her and waiting with her and everything. And I just thought, God, I really deserved that. But when she gave me that compliment, and I did feel my face sort of soften, and I felt something inside my body change. What would you say about events that kind of come to you when you are being like that? Because in my experience, when I've been horrible because I'm going through something in my life, like what you did in the car park and just sort of making assumptions and being in a bad place, bad things do happen.
I think, first of all, can I just say, my editor said to me about that story in the book, are you sure you want to put that in the book?
Not really.
And I said, yeah, because I'm human and I don't get it right all the time. I might write about kindness, but it doesn't mean that I'm the world expert in it. It means that I'm human and I don't always get it right. And I said, I'd like to leave it in the book. And she says, but it might make people who think you're the king of kindness. And I said, I'm not bothered about that because people relate to that and see themselves and say, look, that's okay because I don't get it right, but I try to, and we're all just trying to do the best we can. I think sometimes life has a strange way of giving you opportunities to make a correction. In other words, someone throwing up on you just so that you can then be the one who treats them with kindness. I think there's kind of strange, call them mechanisms that operate maybe your own expanded consciousness, if you want to think of it in that kind of way. But I think sometimes, we find ourselves in situations that give us exactly the opportunity to then be the kind of person we wanted to be in the first place. And maybe some of that was going on that day, or maybe it was just total coincidence. But I think there's often deeper processes underlying things through. I think we're all connected in weird and wonderful ways. And I think sometimes life has this amazing way of giving you opportunities to correct your course. I think the more you understand about the importance of empathy and compassion and kindness, I think the more life presents you with opportunities to correct yourself when you're not. the way you want to be.
Yeah. And I guess that you can make it a direct comparison to leader within an organization then, because if you're coming in and you're bringing your own baggage into work and you're being the way I was on that aircraft, you're going through a rough time or whatever, that's got to have a direct impact on the performance of your team, surely.
It does. There's a lot of mechanisms, but one thing is emotional contagion. In the way that you catch a cold from someone, there's something called emotional contagion where you catch people's emotions. And the way it works is we have in our brain a network of cells called the mirror neuron system, MNS. And what that does is it mirrors what you see and what you hear. And babies have it. It's one of the ways that babies and young children learn by mirroring the facial expressions of their parents. And so when you're in the presence of someone, let's say it's someone at work, and they're displaying happiness. So what your mirror neuron system is picking up through your primary senses, in this case, your eyes and your ears, are picking up facial expressions of happiness and vocal intonations of happiness. And your mirror neuron system mirrors this exactly. That's why it's called the mirror neuron system. And what that does is it activates the same neural circuits as those displayed on the person's face. And so when you're with someone who's happy, you start to feel happier, not because of what they're saying. I mean, a small percentage, between 10 and 40% is down to, of how you feel is down to what they're saying. But 60 to 90% is actually down to how they're saying it because of your mirror neuron system. Now, flick it around the other way. Let's say the person is your boss at work and they're displaying aggression or anger. And 60 to 90% of what your brain is picking up is their anger. Your brain is then catching that emotion, whatever the negative emotion root of that is, through mirroring the facial expressions, mirroring the vocal intonations and the tension in the body. And you find yourself, without realizing, during that time, your shoulders begin to tense, your jaw begins to tense. And then after that conversation, you go away, but you're still carrying that emotion. And then you pass it on to someone else because so you're now interacting with someone else. You might not be acting aggressively, but you're carrying the emotional state on your facial expressions, in the vocal intonations in your body. Someone else you interact with now, their mirror neuron system mirrors your facial expressions. And what you get is a ripple that decreases in intensity as it goes through, but you do pass it on to other people. And emotions are contagious. And some research actually showed that the state of the primary person, the manager, this was in a retail chain, the state of the manager actually impacted the bottom line of what the company made. Researchers looked at thousands and thousands of customers that entered a retail chain over a period of 18 months, and they found that the state of the manager actually influenced how much money that company made, and they even tracked it down to how much they made per person visiting the store, because the manager's state impacted the staff state who were interacting with customers, who then impacted the customers, and the customers, because of how they feel, make a buying decision. Do I want to buy more or less from this place? And it turned out they bought less. And so you can actually see this emotional contagion ripple, but it happens in every organization. It happens in the street. It happens in your family, in your household. And so the question becomes then, how can I be in a state that is actually spreading something positive? And one of the simplest ways to do that is to make an effort to be kind, to start with empathy, to be patient with people, to be willing to understand people, to be compassionate with people, to respect people. Just any way that you can practice kindness begins to spread a positive ripple rather than a negative one.
What is it then, do you think, is the gap that we have in many organizations where it has been almost pioneered or expected that to be in any leadership position, you wouldn't show vulnerability or weakness, and that would include kindness or anything deemed as silly? How have we come to that conclusion that is what makes good leadership based on that research you've just described?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, I suppose, the contagion of role models. We learn from the people that were influential in us, and that's how they treated me. So that's how you're supposed to be. But the second thing, from a science perspective, is a misunderstanding of the whole term survival of the fittest. We have for a long time grossly misunderstood what that actually means. And we think the fittest means the physically fittest, the strongest, the most powerful. But that's not actually what evolution meant. And Darwin never ever said that anyway. Survival of the fittest actually means that she or he who's better able to adapt to the environment that they're in. Now, adaptability really is right linked to empathy. So in actual fact, the fittest is the person, not who's the physically strongest or the cleverest, fastest or the most powerful and aggressive. The fittest in most situations is actually she or he who understands better, he or she who has patience and sympathy and an ability to relate to another person. That's actually what survival of the fittest means. And in the long term, that someone who has empathy will be much more likely to thrive in almost any environment you find yourself in, whether it's in an organization or anywhere, really. And that's what survival of the fittest actually means. And I think we misunderstood it for decades, which is why underlying a lot of people think that you have to be strong and tough, and think, therefore, that empathy and heart-centered, softer skills are weakness. But it's not weakness. In actual fact, if that is what the fittest that thing actually is, then surely that's real strength in the long term. And I think if we understood that real strength is your ability to empathize and to relate to people, to have patience and to understand people, that ability to put people at ease, make people feel safe, make people feel heard, make people feel seen, make people feel respected, give people a chance to stretch themselves. I think that's what the fittest actually is, and that's, I think, what real strength is. And I think if we understood that, I think we'd start to see a movement away from thinking the only way to solve the problems is by telling people to do this, that, or the next thing. Because people don't like to be pointed at and to be on the receiving end of aggression. At the end of the day, you'll lose people. You might get people who are loyal to you, but that's not the same as people who actually genuinely respect you.
I think what you said there, that links really closely to your other book, actually, I Love Me, doesn't it? And self-belief, because would you say that some leaders are scared to show that human side because of a fear that they might be seen as weak?
Absolutely. I can speak from personal experience here, because that book, I Heart Me, I wrote that for myself, really, because I was struggling with self-esteem, had done struggled for years. And you can get by without people noticing, because there's two types of self-esteem. There's internal and there's external. And external is what a lot of people have in positions of power. It's when you derive your sense of worthiness and value from your successes and achievements in life and what you think is people's opinion of you. But if that's the only form of self-esteem you have, that external, then all it takes is a couple of bad reviews, a couple of people's opinion changes, a couple of failures, and it's devastating. Whereas internal self-esteem you might define as an inner sense of your own worthiness and value that's not dependent upon external circumstances. It doesn't mean you don't want people to like you, that's human. It doesn't mean that you don't want to be successful. Again, that's natural. It just means that your internal sense of value isn't rested upon those things. That if stuff doesn't go right, you have this sort of internal resource that sort of knows, you know what, so it's going to be okay. And I'm still a decent person. And so I had none of the latter and a lot of the former. And I think a lot of people in leadership roles have a lot of the external stuff and not very much of the internal stuff. And I personally remember always trying to have the answers to things in case people thought, if I show vulnerability here, then how can I possibly inspire or lead these people? Because they'll think, well, he obviously doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't want to work with this guy because, you know, you've got a PhD, you're supposed to know. And what it took me years to understand is, if you're honest and if you show vulnerability and honesty and that kind of thing, then you start working together with people. And you all work together rather than you telling people and trying to have all the answers. You work together and you solve problems together as a team. And isn't that wonderful? And I think it's that perception, it's that little fear that people will think that I need to have all the answers to everything, not just technically. I was in a technical position, but not just technically, but in life in general. And if I show vulnerability, then they won't follow me, they won't listen to me, they'll go with someone else instead. But in actual fact, people need this opportunity to help you. We want to help each other. It doesn't matter whether it's your boss or someone working alongside you or in another department. We want to work together and help each other out, because that's a natural human instinct to connect in whichever way, no matter who you're connecting with. So I think vulnerability is a wonderful thing. And from a male perspective, it took me a long time to recognize that, because I was afraid of it, because I thought I needed to be a man's man and tough and really be the leader all the time. And leading doesn't mean that I have to be the strong one. It really can mean the one who empathizes the most, the one who ends up with more people working with you. That, I think, is a much better leader than someone pointing the finger and telling you what to do all the time.
What do you think organizations can do to start to instill a culture where that is encouraged of leaders?
I think a couple of ways. First of all, making it really visible that this is our aspiration. And be honest, this is an aspiration, because we're not going to get it right all the time. And people at all different levels, if we have it as an aspiration, then it gives us that bit of wiggle room and leverage to learn, to practice it. And then you can actually have education, whether it's training programs to train leaders in how do I lead with kindness? What does that look like in a variety of different situations? It might be different for different people, but in different roles, you have different constraints. So what does it look like in my situation? So it's about education. We have to learn what works, what's appropriate, what's better for this type of role, and what that means. How to lead with kindness, or how to interact, how to have kindness in a team. What does it look like in this sort of environment? So having it visible as an aspiration is one thing. And secondly, it's about educating and learning. So how do we do it? Whether it's a speaker comes in and talks about it, or whether there's individual training for different people. But I think it's having a commitment. If it's an aspiration, then it's a commitment to learning about how to do it within the job, not just saying we're going to be a kind organization in terms of how we treat our customers. We're also going to be a kind organization in terms of how we relate to one another. And so it's about education and learning. What does that mean? And then it's a practice. It's something that never really stops, does it? Because you're not going to get it right in day one, but over a year, you might make a heck of a lot of progress. And I think what you then see is you have less absenteeism, because kindness is the opposite of stress. So you begin to move towards practically solving a stress problem. You might not solve it entirely, but you move in the right direction. And also you reduce the number of people leaving the company, because people want to stay in a place where they feel valued and supported and respected.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's definitely about the vision, but also that knowledge piece is really important, because if you present an organization with a problem such as people leaving or stress, so you get statistics in, half the workforce is stress and this decreases productivity and so on. They'll come up with some very linear solutions, especially since COVID, like, oh, we'll introduce flexible working policies or work-life balance, and all great, of course. But if you were to put your hand up, "Hi, CEO, I think kindness might help here somehow." I think just actually by understanding what you've said there in terms of, do you realise how that contributes to stress and actually is the antidote to stress, is really powerful. Because I think once leaders start to understand that and they start to understand that impact, like, wow, if I come in one day and I'm bringing something in to work, rather than actually just being vulnerable and honest and saying, look, listen, sorry team, I'm going through a rough time at the moment and probably at 10% today. If I'm snappy, I'm sorry, or whatever that human vulnerable elements, just by understanding the impact that has, I think is really powerful. I don't know if you're aware of Patrick Lencioni's work on teams, the 5
No.
behaviours. Well, the first behaviour to create a cohesive team, so it works in a pyramid. You have to do the first behaviour first before you can get to the top, which is results. It's vulnerability-based trust. So that's about nothing more than admitting who you are as a person. So, I'm sorry, yeah, I've made a mistake. I don't know the answer. Like you were saying before, just actually being comfortable enough to do that and having the culture where you can do that will then lead up the pyramid to
Yeah,
eventually
yeah.
results in that cohesivity. So one thing I've learned from doing this podcast, to be honest, is everybody I've spoken to, and I've spoken to lots of different people for different walks of life, it all comes down to the same thing, which is just basic human connection.
Yeah.
And it's been astounding. It doesn't matter actually who you're talking to or what they're an expert in. If you bring it back to that organizational lens and get into what really makes a successful organization or a place where people really want to be, it's always the same thing.
And isn't it right that empathy is our way to connect? It's how we connect. And there's lots of ways you can show empathy. And ultimately, we are biologically wired, genetically wired to connect. In fact, the genes associated with human connection are the same genes associated with kindness and empathy. And they're some of the oldest in the human genome. They're at least 100 million years old. And they're related to the natural tendency we have as humans to care and to express that care through kind words, supportive words, or through kind actions. And so we are biologically wired for this. It's one of our deepest instincts. And sometimes we override the instincts by thinking that isn't tough, that's not strong, and we think we need to be strong and tough. But the natural instinct is to care because it's so ancient. And that is actually why when you do show kindness, there's a whole range of different positive physiological effects, because eons ago, our ancient ancestors learned from experience that if we help each other out, if we work together, then we're safer. And we're also going to thrive if we're helping each other in the community. If someone's hunting or gathering the food and someone's helping to create it, and we're working with the children, we're all working together as a group, as a team, rather than just everyone fending for themselves. We're going to survive a lot longer, and we're going to thrive as a species, as a tribe, which becomes teams and groups and towns and stuff over time. And so what happens is the human species started to live longer lives because they were connecting and helping each other out. And what then happened is connection and kind and caring behaviours became associated with longer lifespan and healthier lives. Wind the clock forward hundreds of thousands of years, and now when you show empathy or compassion or support or care in any kindness in any form, it triggers a whole host of positive physiological effects. This is the underlying reason of why being kind impacts your heart. It's underlying reason why, which I didn't go into the physiology, but it also impacts your immune system right down to the genetic level, and it impacts your happiness, your brain states and stuff. It's because we are genetically wired for connection. So when you said there about it all really just comes down to connection, that you absolutely hit the nail on the head, so to speak, because that's really what it comes down to, because that's who we actually are, is a species whose natural instinct is to connect.
I know that you've had leaders come up to you when you've been speaking and you've been talking about kindfulness, you call it, which I love that term, by the way. And yeah, creating that culture of kindfulness. And you have had leaders approach you and say, oh, well, what does that look like? How would I do that? But what about leaders who aren't naturally that way inclined? I know you reference a lot of studies in your book about that. How can you help leaders who don't have that natural tendency start to develop that
Yeah.
skill? You call
Yeah,
it?
I think first of all, we all do have the natural tendency. I mean, there's a spectrum. Some people are naturally very, very empathetic, and that's a biological thing, and some people are less so. But within that spectrum, everyone can learn. Some people who are naturally empathetic can unlearn it because life sometimes is hard. And it trains it out of you because you've had so many knocks and bumps. And for other people who've very little empathy, they can actually learn empathy. And you never know when you come across someone who's not very empathetic. Is that because that's how they naturally are? Or are they naturally empathetic and it's just really been trained out of them? And for most people, I would say if they're not empathetic, it's because it's been trained out of them because life's been tough. Or they've had role models that somehow have taught them through experience that this is how you're supposed to be. But empathy is one of the most moldable and pliable skills. And what I mean by skills is it's something that we can learn. And I think starting from that point is something we can learn. There's ways to train empathy. There's ways to practice empathy. If someone's very in their head, it can even be as simple as, okay, this is what you would need to do in various type of situations. And when people start to learn that, even if they don't seem to be naturally empathetic, it does actually remind us, okay, even if I don't feel naturally empathetic, if I do these things which someone else who's empathetic says is the empathetic thing to do, then we start to learn and then you start to feel it. So I would say most people are actually naturally empathetic despite how they might appear.
Yeah.
Many males, for example, I'm talking from my own past experience, naturally very caring people. Put them in a different environment from the workplace and you see a totally different side. Someone who's an absolute wonderful parent, for example, but doesn't appear to be that kind of person at work. And you think, well, that's not a very empathetic person, but you maybe dig a wee bit deeper. They really are a very naturally loving and caring person, but they're just in a different context here. And it's about education and learning that being empathetic in a work environment doesn't mean being soft. It doesn't mean being, weak. It allows you to connect with people on another level. And then you'll find that things might work out very differently, positively, more than you realize.
What I'm getting from what you've just said there, I think in an organizational context, then it's really about sort of setting the vision, deciding, oh, yes, this is worthwhile. And then it's giving that education and helping people understand the value, not just on them as individuals, but of course on everything we do in an organization. I learned so much from your book, especially I Heart Me. I'm just thinking about that low self-worth feeling that could impact somebody's ability to be vulnerable from that fear of, oh, I'm going to look like I don't know what I'm doing because I don't believe I know what I'm doing. Actually, it's quite funny. I did a podcast with Dave Snowden, who is a very clever man, and half what he said I didn't understand. I actually said to him, oh, I don't really understand what you're saying. What did you say there? And a lady wrote on LinkedIn, she was like, oh, I couldn't listen to this podcast because I felt that he spoke to you in a really derogatory manner and felt he made you look stupid. And I just thought, well, this is brilliant because this is exactly what Authentic Ewe is about. Because the point is for me, is I didn't feel stupid in any way because I don't believe I am stupid. And certainly wasn't his intent to make me feel stupid. From an outsider perspective, I completely understand why one might think that way. But I thought, isn't that interesting that I did understand that people might perceive it that way, but for me, it doesn't affect me at all because I'm steady enough. God, I'm not saying that I have complete self-worth. I went to a tarot card reader once, and she told me my life lesson was self-love. And I remember going away thinking, self-love. And then I realised that actually I think everyone's lesson on the planet is self-love. I thought I was special at the time. But I was like, this is my journey, my journey only. I think I have come on a bit of a journey with that. But it is interesting, some of the things that you say in I Heart Me, because what I didn't realise, and it's never occurred to me, is you talk about just as our mind affects our body affects our mind.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that's fascinating, really.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm glad what you said about self-love there, and it's good to see that you do have that more self-worth that you didn't perceive the way he was speaking to you in a way that made you feel stupid, because you know that you are intelligent and you have so much to offer. That's really great that you felt that way, because it shows that you really have come far in the journey you're on, because a lot of people don't feel particularly strong. I mean, I still struggle with those kind of things, even though I wrote a book on self-love. As I say, I wrote it for myself. It just so happened to be published it. But I think self-love is a journey that I don't know if it ever ends.
No.
Really, I've made huge gains since I wrote the book, since I worked on the book, 'cause I'd never worked on that subject. And so I made huge gains in the 2 years it took me to write that book, which is the longest I've ever taken to write a book. Actually, I remember my publisher, I gave myself a deadline, and she said, "Are you sure you want to write it that fast?" I goes, "Yeah, I'm so determined to learn self-love and self-esteem." And with the deadline 6 months, I delivered the book in 6 months, and my publisher sat me aside and said, "You know, we all love you in the office, but," and I thought, "Oh no." He said, "We can't publish the book as it is. If we were to go to print now, it would be damaging to your career." That's the most honest
Really?
but kindly put words that a professional person has ever said to me. And she was absolutely right. This was the MD of Hay House in the UK, Michelle Pilley. Very empathetic, lovely, kind person. And also having the presence to communicate with kindness and empathy to me, but also saying something that was absolutely true. But the way she put it didn't make me feel stupid. The way she put it made me feel understood. And then she did an extraordinary thing. The publishers have times, deadlines, and they've got a lot of people who've done a lot of work to schedule a book in. And all that work had already been done for my book. And then she said to me, "Right, no deadline." She said, "Forget all that." She says, "Just take as long as you like. Just go back and work on the book for as long as you need. And when you feel you've got to a stage where you can deliver the book, get back in touch, and then we'll schedule in the editing and the print and stuff like that." And that was an incredible thing. It took me another year, year and a half actually, to write the book. It's the longest I've ever taken to write a book, because I wrote the first version in my head. In the way I'd written other books, I researched the science and I presented it all. I had learned nothing about what actual self-love and self-compassion actually was. And that's why I remember ended up getting emotional in front of Michelle that day, because I realised that I had learned nothing properly in that 6 month period of writing the book. It took me 18 months to shift enough through writing it and really learning the stuff that I was able to then put a book out, which I'm now to this day immensely proud of. And it has actually been my most successful book.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Because I think it was the most honest book. And one of the big shifts in me, I wasn't in a space in the first version of the book to learn anything meaningful. But when Michelle gave me all the time I needed, took all the pressure off me, what an amazing leader, took all the pressure off me. But having trust in me, she let me know that I'm here if you need me, and we all the team are here to support you. That was an amazing thing. I mean, imagine leaders at work doing that for staff. That was incredible. And that allowed me to turn in one of the best books I've ever read, the most personal. So the best books I've ever written, not read. I've read other people's books a lot better than mine, if I'm being really honest. But my best book I'd written at that point. And the first big shift I made was exactly to answer the question that you asked a moment ago, was learning the relationship between how you feel on the inside and how comes across on the outside, and learning that that is a bi-directional relationship. And what bi-directional means is it goes both ways. just as it's true that how you feel is written all over your face, and it comes across in how you hold and move your body. How you hold and move your body and move your face also impacts how you feel. It means that if you, on purpose, intentionally hold and move your body in certain ways, which comes to how you hold your shoulders and move your spine, even how you breathe consciously, and how you move your face and your mouth and all that. If you're intentional with these things, then you can have a massive and rapid impact on how you feel. So you can learn to be more compassionate, for example, by modeling someone who's naturally empathetic and compassionate. You can learn that's what they do with their body. And by practicing that, it starts to make you feel more empathetic and compassionate. One of the things I wanted to learn was how to have an inner sense of worthiness and value. And I realized that what that actually meant was, instead of slouching my shoulders and being physically small, what if I actually stood tall? Which meant just stretching my spine by standing up a bit straighter and pulling my shoulders back a little bit.
I'm doing it now.
Amy Cuddy wrote about this as the power pose. You know, it's a lot of research on that. And putting your body in a high power posture, it doesn't necessarily mean I have to be strong and tough. For me, it wasn't about specifically confidence per se. I said to myself, how would I hold my body and move my body if I felt genuinely an inner sense of my own worthiness and value? And I just tried to feel how that would feel. And I said, okay, I will do the best I can now to try to hold that most of the time. So I used to set reminders on my phone to ping me every hour or so to remind me, and just the word came up, posture. And I had to just remind myself, what am I doing? And a lot of the time initially, for the first few weeks, I was like that. I write a lot of my books in coffee shops. I was standing in line in a coffee shop and I was like that. I was on my phone. It would ping, posture, I'd breathe from my tummy and just breathe and relax. I'd consciously relax my facial muscles. I consciously relax my neck. But at the same time as being relaxed, I'd pull my shoulders back and strengthen my spine. So I was relaxed and I was also strong. And that was me having an inner sense of worthiness and value, relaxed and strong, but also flexible. How does a tree behave? A tree is strong and flexible. It's strong trunk, but it's also flexes in the wind. And I thought, what if I can kind of model a tree, be willing to bend and adapt and empathize, but also be strong and relaxed? And that was how I learned, by literally ingraining over a period of a few months in myself an inner sense of worthiness and value, by changing how I felt on the inside, by practicing holding how I held my body on the outside. And that for me was an absolute game changer.
Game changer. I was just about to say this exact word, because for me, it's a game changer. Because, of course, we all know, what you think affects how things go, or your confidence, or how you give that presentation, or how you're perceived by other people, or whatever. But sometimes to change your mental state of being is hard. It is a lot easier to just go, wow, then all I'm going to do is sit up straight and put my hands on my hips. And that's actually going to have the same effect of if I was actually able to change my inner monologue. That's so much easier to do, because even if you feel like absolute poo, you can still stand up straight and put your shoulders back. Yeah, that's actually really easy to do.
Yeah, and the thing is, the more you practice that, the more it starts to wire your brain circuits. Because think of it, if you go to the gym, right, and you work out a muscle, and you keep doing reps at the gym, you'll notice that three things happen to the muscle. It becomes firmer, larger, more powerful. Now, that's not happening just on your muscle. That's simultaneously happening in the brain. If you take a brain scan of the region connected to the muscle, what you'll see is that region is undergoing something called neuroplasticity at exactly the same time. And here's the thing, if you inhibited the neuroplasticity in the brain, that muscle would not get any stronger. The muscle requires the brain to undergo the neuroplasticity. It's a two-way street. If you practice adjusting your posture in a way that says, I have an inner sense of worthiness and value, for example, then as you're adjusting all these muscles which convey that feeling, what do you think happens in the brain? Neuroplasticity. We begin to wire in all these muscle movements which are associated with that state. So what begins to wire into the brain is that psychological state of feeling an inner sense of worthiness and value. The game changer was suddenly beginning to feel in different environments a way that was completely alien to me. Like I didn't know what self-esteem was because I never really had it. I'd had the external, people saying, oh, well done for getting your degree and your PhD, well done for achieving this or achieving that, fantastic, great, and I'm feeling good because these people said I'm doing really well, but I never actually felt properly on the inside. And all of a sudden I was beginning to feel something I'd never felt before. And it was further down the line where the next game changer for me was something we've already spoke a little bit about, which was vulnerability and being okay with being vulnerable. I want to learn how to have the courage to be vulnerable, then I would recommend Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. And then I wrote a few chapters in my book on that because for me, it took a wee while to internalize the message in Brené Brown's book. And as I internalized that message, it began to shape my own experiences. And as we said right at the very start, that life presents you with opportunities to become, I suppose, what you're really trying to become. And so I had a series of situations and events that allowed me to, or forced me to be vulnerable or not. And vulnerable was the way to go.
I'm thinking a million things as you're talking here. I sort of don't know where to start, but yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the power pose because I've been doing that a lot and I've had quite a few presentations and things to do recently and I've been doing it and it's absolutely brilliant. So I think just by sharing those kind of tips and things in organizations is massively helpful for people.
Yeah.
I'm smiling at Brené Brown because as you were talking about the feedback that you got from your editor, I remember quoting Brené Brown in an organization I was with actually, whose vision was absolutely not kindfulness. And I declared once that feedback was love to quote Brené Brown directly. And they laughed in my face. So that was just sort of amusing me as you were talking there, especially about the feedback that you got, which was, of course, love.
It was delivered directly, but immensely compassionately. It was a terrific balance.
I've been thinking of ways to promote that. I always try and seek out people as allies, so people that I can connect with. So when something goes wrong or, I'm annoyed or whatever, I've got that safe space to go and have an unfiltered conversation with someone where I don't have to watch what I say or, I could just be like, well, this is awful and this happened and this person did this. And, that's a safe space and it's just getting it off your chest can really help. But also, I found as I've cultivated those relationships, when I've been a complete plonker or I've done something wrong, they are able to give me that feedback, even though it's difficult. A, because they care enough to take the time to actually tell me, because otherwise, why would you? If you didn't care, then why, unless you were managing someone's performance, why would you bother having a difficult conversation with someone? You just wouldn't. And secondly, I know that it's meant, like you did with your editor, with good intent. And so I'm then able to learn from it. And it's doing me good because if I don't learn, then I'm just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And that could have detrimental consequences. So I just think it'd be great if in an organization we can actually set up mechanisms to encourage people to find their person and just have people who can do that for each other. I think that would make a massive difference.
No, that's such a terrific idea. You could call it safe space.
Yeah, something like that. Just anything. Go and find your person. It was like a matchmaking kind of thing. I saw someone do something the other day who I really like, and I thought, oh, oh no, that wasn't good. I was so close, liberated over it to go and tell that person, like when you did that, like was the impact and just saying. But I didn't in the end, and I did struggle with it, and I didn't because I thought that person had a lot going on externally, and I thought, oh, me just saying that might just tip them over the edge there. And I don't know if they would really understand the intent that I'm actually giving that feedback from. I think if you had that kind of formal relationship, I've actually said to one person at work, right, you are my person for this. So it's actually been a verbal agreement.
Yeah. I think in that other example, that also shows your empathy. You're reading the situation and understanding that maybe that would tip that person over the edge. Because I think that when we learn empathy, we also recognize when it's right to give feedback, even if it's with the right intentions, and actually when it's not, even with the best intentions, sometimes it isn't the right thing at that particular time.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's part of the empathy journey, isn't it? I've been told that you have to give feedback all the time, and if you say it with kindness, it's always going to be the right thing. But there's different levels of that. It might always be the right thing if it's well intentioned, but it might not always land the right way. Sometimes part of what empathy is understanding a person enough, a situation enough, that maybe being completely honest isn't the right thing. It might be the right thing from another perspective in terms of what's best for the team or the organization, but it might not always be the right thing for that person. And then the challenge is, what would be the right thing that still has us going in the right direction long term, but the right thing might not be being lovingly communicating the feedback. Might not be, because the
Yeah.
person might not be in the right space for that, and it could be damaging to some people's mental health, for example. So I think part of empathy is understanding not just how do I communicate, but understanding, empathizing enough with the person when you know what you should and when you should and shouldn't say it.
Yeah.
It's not always as clear cut, is it? I think it's one of the things that I've learned in my journey of researching, writing about kindness, is it's not always clear cut. The answer isn't always this or that. You know, being kind isn't always this. Sometimes being kind is that. And being unkind isn't always that. Sometimes it's this. And it depends on the situation. It's not always as black and white as people think. That's kind for one person, but it's not kind for another person. And empathy, I think, is how you learn to discern what is the right thing to do and say.
Yeah. 100%. What do you think not having a culture of kindfulness is costing organizations today?
It's costing organizations money in replacing staff who leave, who go to other organizations where they feel there's more meaning in what they do. But because meaning can come from what might seem like a meaningless job if you feel you're treated with respect and kindness and support. And so it can be a huge cost saver just having a culture of kindness because people want to stay. And secondly, a side effect of that is reduced absenteeism due to stress. If a culture of kindness tackles the issue, at least partway tackles the issue of stress by creating a culture that is the exact antidote to that. And it'll not be in every single pocket of it, but if we create it generally, though, the general sense of a culture of kindness will actually reduce absenteeism. These are two tangible, very clear and obvious benefits.
I think it's massive. And I can think of another one as well. It's this term that we keep using, this term of psychological safety, which is massive for organizations at the moment. You go in anywhere, or I go in, and my role is OD. And the first thing people will tell me is, can you do a capability framework and sort out our performance development? And then there's psychological safety. We need an initiative for that. And I'm like, right. And literally, it's so misunderstood. People are just scratching their heads. Or, I wonder what this thing is. And, we have to be psychologically safe, or people are going to leave and then we have to pay them some sort of compensation. It all just comes down to being decent human beings. I was bullied at work. Obviously, I appreciated at the time this was saying more about this manager than me. And it was coming from an absolute place of fear and insecurity. And, there's a story behind, why she was doing it. But the culture is very, very toxic. And they really had no idea about how to create that culture and make it an expectation of a manager. It had a massive, massive impact on my mental health and whole life. But do you know what? I was like, I was supposed to go through this because it made me remember why I started Authentic Ewe in the first place. And I had forgotten. And I realized, and I was completely out of touch. And I realized now I'd started it because I never ever wanted anybody to have to feel like that at work. And so it's really a purpose and a mission to help find out what makes organizations where people love to work and really do feel that they can be their authentic self and they're safe enough to actually be who they are, be accepted without judgment.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it was a purposeful lesson that I was meant to experience. I just wanted to finish up on a key question for me. I'd love to ask you if you could suggest one thing that leaders and organizations should do to create a workplace where people genuinely love to come to work and feel safe to be their authentic selves, what would it be?
I would say just make it something visible that we are aspiring to be a kind organization. And not declaring we are, when a lot of people say, well, I'm not because I'm being bullied, for example. But if we are aspiring to be, then that gives wiggle room, doesn't it? It lets us feel safe. Because even if I'm working the company and I'm not there yet, I don't feel like I've learned how to do this. I feel safer if I know we are aspiring. There's an opportunity for me to learn. So I think if we're aspiring to become a kind or a kinder organization, that allows for the natural process of growth, of learning. And I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Well, Dr. David Hamilton, thank you very much for your time.
It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
So having me on.